Today we turn from the series on the book of Esther, which we completed last week, to the life of Jesus in the book of Matthew. And we come upon Jesus and the disciples in a mountaintop experience. A mountaintop experience. I wonder if you've ever had a mountaintop experience. It could be a literal mountaintop experience when you have climbed a mountain or driven to the top of a mountain or even a tall tower and felt what it's like to be a little closer to the heavens. Or maybe it's been more of a spiritual experience for you. An experience of God that maybe felt like profound love or conviction or clarity or overwhelming joy, or even a time when you knew without a doubt that you were hearing the voice of God. It's another kind of experience of being closer to the heavens. So I invite you to sort of scan your life and just identify a mountaintop experience or two if you've had them. And hold that in your mind and in your heart as we talk about this mountaintop experience that Jesus had with his favorite disciples, Peter, James, and John. Yes, Jesus actually had favorites. Don't tell the other disciples. The other 9. So they have this mountaintop experience, and then there's this thing that comes afterward, which was the opposite of a mountaintop experience. And here's the good news for today. Mountains and valleys are never far apart. Mountains and valleys are never far apart. We're going to use art today to help us process this story. So here is an icon. It's not an ancient icon like some of them are, but this is a modern icon drawn by artist Kelly Lattimore, reflecting today's story, the Transfiguration. So here is the icon, and I actually want us to go deep with this image. So I want to invite you to just turn to someone near you and share what you notice. Just share what you notice about this. If it feels more comfortable to you to do that just with your own self quietly, that's fine too. Or if you're on your own watching the live stream, just take a little bit of time to notice. And if you are here in the sanctuary, I invite you to turn to someone and take a moment just to share what you notice. You don't have to know what it means. You don't need to explain it. Just share what you notice. All right, with this image and all that it brought up in our minds, we're going to look at it again in a minute, so you don't need to finish your noticing right now. But let's read the story from Matthew chapter 17. Now, a couple things you need to know before we start reading is that things have started to heat up around Jesus and the disciples. Jesus has been in active ministry for a number of years at this point, and healing people and preaching and teaching in a way that was really disruptive to the powers that be. And the heat had been starting to turn up around Jesus. All right, so let's start Matthew chapter 17, starting at verse 1. 6 days later, so this is on the seventh day, and that little detail is a literary device from the author of the book of Matthew, as the number 7 is very symbolic in the book of Matthew. 6 days later, Jesus took with him Peter and James and his brother John and led them up to a high mountain by themselves. And he was transfigured. Now, the Greek word there is one that you'll probably be familiar with. The word is metamorphed. Jesus was metamorphed, like metamorphosis. He underwent a change before them. And his face shone like the sun, and his clothes became bright as light. Suddenly, there appeared to them Moses and Elijah talking with him. All right, so let's go back to Kelly Lattimore's piece again, the Transfiguration, and let's look at it with that little bit of information from the story in our minds. So who's at the top? Jesus. It's usually the right answer in church, isn't it? And beside him, we have Moses and Elijah. So Moses is there in the purple robes and holding, any guesses as to what Moses is holding? The 10 Commandments from one of Moses' own mountaintop experiences, where he went up to the mountain and met with God and received the 10 Commandments. And then we have on the other side Elijah, who had his own series of mountaintop experiences. And Jesus, who is shining. Jesus is shining. There's deep symbolism here in this story. Moses and Elijah represent the pillars of the faith, the sources of divine authority that Jews would have had before them at this time were the law and the prophets. So Moses and Elijah appear with him, representing the law and the prophets. But who's the one that's shining here? Jesus is shining. Jesus is shining above the law and the prophets. The law and the prophets have appeared here to show Jesus' authority. All right, let's keep reading. Back to Matthew 17 at verse 4. Then Peter said to Jesus, so now we're back to the disciples. We've got Moses and Elijah representing the law and the prophets, and we've got Peter, James, John, and Jesus who are there. So Peter said to Jesus, Lord, it's good for us to be here. If you wish, I'll set up 3 tents here, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah. And apparently Peter, James, and John are going to, sleep under the stars? I'm not sure. Why wouldn't it be 6 tents? But it's 3 tents. Peter wants to contain all this goodness. Peter wants to build structures around this goodness that is present right here. But before Peter can even continue his thought, we learn that apparently God does not wish for this. That God is doing something here, and he will not let Peter interrupt what is unfolding. So at verse 5, while he was still speaking, so God interrupts Peter, suddenly a bright cloud overshadowed them, and a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him." And if you've ever read the book of Matthew before, you know that those were the same words that God had said when Jesus was baptized earlier in the book, before the disciples had been with him. This is my son, the beloved. With him I am well pleased. Listen to him. Not the law and the prophets. God is saying, listen to Jesus, my beloved. All right, verse 6. When the disciples heard this, they fell to the ground and were overcome with fear. Remember, they were lying on the ground down below, like they were going to fall down the mountain? But Jesus came and touched them, saying, "Get up and do not be afraid." And when they raised their eyes, they saw no one except Jesus himself alone. Just as quickly as this mountaintop experience had come, it also passed. The vision that they had came and went. I wonder if your mountaintop experience was like that, if it was a spiritual one. Did it come and go so fast you could hardly grasp it? Did it make you fall down? And it's mentioned, I love how Matthew mentions the disciples, what they were doing with their eyes, right? They fell down, and then they raised their eyes to Jesus. I wonder what Jesus' eyes were doing. I bet he was rolling his eyes. Get up. Good grief. Don't be afraid. So the four of them are there on the mountaintop alone. What do you do from there? Like, where do you go from that kind of mountaintop experience? Maybe you know what that's like. You have a mountaintop experience, maybe at a retreat or a camp or some kind of spiritual experience in meditation, and then it's over. And what comes next? So they begin to make the transition back to real life. We'll pick it up at verse 9. As they were coming down from the mountain, Jesus ordered them, "Tell no one about this vision until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead." So this is where we get the hint that things have been heating up around the disciples and Jesus. And while, yes, the good news of Jesus needs to spread, Jesus is trying to keep things from boiling over. And so we have this little snippet that he keeps repeating to them also about what it means to be the Son of Man. Don't tell anyone about this until after the Son of Man has been raised from the dead, because he's been telling them, I'm going to die, I'm going to raise again. So don't tell anyone until after this is over, and then tell them. So moving on, now as they're going down the mountain, the disciples obviously have Elijah on the brain. And as what we read next, we can hear them trying to process what had just happened in the light of the scripture that they knew so well. So let's pick up the conversation at verse 10. The disciples asked him, "Why then do the scribes say that Elijah must come first?" Jesus replied, "Elijah is indeed coming and will restore all things. But I tell you that Elijah has already come, and they did not recognize him, but they did to him whatever they pleased." So also, here's again a little foretaste that Jesus is trying to give them about what's going to happen to him. So also the Son of Man is about to suffer at their hands. Then the disciples understood that he was speaking to them about John the Baptist. Now, John the Baptist, just before this in the book of Matthew, had been beheaded by Herod at the request of Herod's wife. And remember the gruesome part of the story where they present his head on a platter to Herod at this banquet. So they're having this conversation, trying to process what's happened as they come down from the mountain, and you see the complexity start to come in. There's this moment of incredible clarity and confusion for the disciples up on the mountaintop, and then things start to filter down as they come down from the mountain. And here we note that mountaintop experiences are never quite so simple. Remember what I said at the beginning, if I can find it, where was it? That mountains, mountaintops, and valleys are never far apart from each other. My family, when I was a teenager, had a mountaintop experience, a literal mountaintop experience. We went on a family vacation to Colorado. It was in the context of an intense time in my dad's life in particular. My dad was a pastor, and it had been a period in the congregation that he served that had been full of tough conversations, and he was getting a lot of intense pushback and didn't have very much support from the leaders in his congregation. In the context of that difficulty, he also started serving as a chaplain for the rescue squad in the town where we lived. And so whenever the rescue squad got called out, his pager would go off, and he would go to wherever the rescue squad was to be a chaplain to whoever was there, which meant that in the off hours that when my dad wasn't working and experiencing all this stress, he would often be called away to these other stressful experiences. But it was where his ministry calling felt most alive for him, and so it was important for him to do that. But it was hard. It was hard, especially for my mom in that time, and she longed to get away from it. Like, let's drive from Michigan to Colorado, because we drive. Also, let's pull a camper. Let's do that through the mountains. Probably not a great idea, but that's what we did. And this vacation was much needed. So we had made the decision, she had made the decision that we were going to go up to Pikes Peak because she loves mountaintops. And you had to pay a toll to go to the top of Pikes Peak. So this was a prime experience because we didn't have money to spend on things like that. So we decided to go to the top of Pikes Peak. It's a long, windy, switchback road to get to the top. We'd been at the top for a while, and my mom is just in her glory. Like, she's standing next to my dad. They're just taking in the beautiful scenery. It was a lovely experience. We were just about to get ready back into our Ford conversion van to drive back down the mountain when a guy standing near us collapsed. And he was there with his wife, and she immediately starts freaking out. The air is thin up there, which we found out later caused his heart attack that he had had. And everything goes into a flurry. Our peaceful mountaintop experience immediately becomes complex. And my dad, of course, went into Reverend Cooper mode. And he went over and started comforting the wife, and he kind of took charge of the scene as he did, like, you, call 911, you, blah, 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 and directed all the people and was there with the wife. We were there for hours while the scene unfolded and while we waited for the medevac helicopter to come and pick up this man and his wife. Mountains and valleys are never far apart. My mom learned that truth, that even when you're on the mountaintop, things can go from being simple and separate and set aside to being all the things coming crashing down. So now we turn back to art. When the artist, a couple years after the artist Kelly Lattimore made that first image, he was using that image with his nephew, teaching him to use Photoshop. He was teaching his nephew, Elliot, to work with digital images and to adjust the colors and to, highlight certain areas. And while they were working, something weird happened with the file. Initially, his impulse was to simply hit undo and bring it back to its original state, but then he looked at it again and realized the beauty of it. And here it is. He called it glitch transformation. And as he looked at it, he realized that it was a visual metaphor for what our mountaintop experiences often become. That we, like Peter, want to contain these experiences and keep them neat and tidy. But what we often realize is that God's Spirit is often wild and uncontainable, and that sometimes what is simple becomes shattered in a way that doesn't make it fall apart, but in a way that makes it sparkle. And so the story continues with Jesus and the disciples. As they come down from their mountain, they learn that mountains and valleys are never far apart. Let's pick up the story again in verse 14. When they came to the crowd, because there was always a crowd following Jesus around at this point, when they came to the crowd, a man came to him, knelt before him, and said, "Lord, have mercy on my son, for he has epilepsy and suffers terribly. He often falls into the fire and often into the water." Can you imagine the terror of a parent with a child who falls and is constantly in physical danger in an unpredictable way? "And I brought him to your disciples, but they could not cure him." Jesus answered, "You faithless and perverse generation, how much longer must I be with you? How much longer must I put up with you? Bring him here to me." And Jesus rebuked the demon, and it came out of him, and the boy was cured from that moment. Then the disciples came to Jesus privately and said, "Why could we not cast it out?" He said to them, "Because of your little faith. For truly, if you have faith the size of a mustard seed, you will say to this mountain, 'Move from here,' and it will move, and nothing will be impossible for you." Let's bring up glitch transformation again. You can also look at it on your bulletin if you want a closer view. The distinction between mountains and valleys is not so clear. It appears that even Jesus couldn't quite take the clarity and affirmation that had happened on that mountain. He couldn't take it with him into what came next, and he became frustrated and had an outburst with his disciples. "How much longer do I need to put up with you idiots?" And so the artist finds hope in the scattered, reflected light of this glitched image, suggesting that even when the mountaintop falls apart, that means that God's presence is not confined to that place, but it's reflected everywhere. And so, of course, God interrupts Peter's instinct to contain that beauty and glory up there on the mountain, because it must spread. It must shatter. It must go from this one place into all the places. And so even with Jesus' frustration in the valley below the mountain, even in the midst of the frustration with his idiot disciples, he brings healing and hope to this man and their child. And this man gets to experience a bit of the shattered glory from the mountaintop. Isn't it like that? That even in the midst of the loss of a loved one, even in the midst of things falling apart, God's glory can still be found there. This light, this glory that we think is contained in the mountaintop alone, is actually reflected and scattered in all directions. So if your life feels glitched right now, the world certainly feels glitched right now. Chaotic, fragmented, confusing, frustrated. Let this icon serve as a reminder that God's glory is not absent in the mess, but often reflected through it. Bear, could you put the glitched image back up again? I invite you now to take a moment just to look at this image. And as we did before, I invite you, if it feels good to you, to turn to someone nearby and to share what you notice about the image itself or about something that connects it with it in your life. And we will close with just a time of noticing together. So go ahead and share if that feels good to you. Let's close together in prayer. God, thank you for being uncontainable, for refusing to be housed in a tent. There's complexity that comes with that is often troubling. That we would like things to be neat and tidy. We would like the mountains to stay on mountains and the valleys to maybe just stay simply valleys. Thank you for the way that when life falls apart, when things shatter, that we can see your glory in scraps. That sometimes maybe that's all we have capacity for, because otherwise the light would be too bright. So help us in the midst of the beautiful and terrible mysteries of your presence and your activity and your work in our lives and in the world. Help us to look for the scraps. Look for the glimpses